Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Midwest Mindset with your host Paul Tyson and
Jay Petoniak.
Jay Petoniak, or Shannon Petoniak, as it says on the screen here, if you are watching this on our YouTube channel. The Midwest Mindset. So today's word is culture, and how culture can affect our lives, right? And that can go in many different directions. And I think Jay and I have an idea of where this is going to go, but I immediately go to work when I hear culture. What's the culture at work? The company that I work for is one of those companies that is notorious for having a very positive culture and a very kind of open-minded culture, diverse culture, some really cool things. But I when I thought about this title and when Jay and I were kind of going back and forth, I came up and found this quote that I got from Simon Sinek, who's a mentor of mine and somebody I always look up to in this area of leadership, of this area of mindset and of optimism. And he has this email that he sends once daily that's called Notes to Inspire is the name of the email. And the quote around culture this week was, "A culture is strong when people work with each other, for each other. A culture is weak when people work against each other for themselves." And, I kind of dramatic pause there. There's my theatrical piece to the podcast. But I just thought, so the one thing that really stands out in that quote for me is when we help each other and work with each other, then we have like a positive, you have a strong culture at work, at home, in your life, right? But when we work against each other for themselves, when our ego gets in the way and we start thinking more for ourselves than for your fellow worker, your fellow employee, your fellow family member, that's when cultures are toxic and get crappy, right? And so I just started with that quote. Jay, we always do this kind of we don't plan ahead. We do our research, we do our homework. But what are your thoughts when you hear that quote like that?
I think it's and I didn't see that till you showed it to me. It's a very digestible way for a complex thing. Like there's so many different ways culture you can go down the researching culture and things like that. And it's just a very simple statement that really encompasses a lot of the thoughts and views behind it. So I thought that was great because it can be you can have a long definition of culture, but that kind of summarizes it in a statement.
Yeah. Well, and like you said earlier, I want to ask questions about culture, what culture means to you, especially coming with your background in HR and some of the things you have your expertise in. But one of the things I love about Simon Sinek is that he may take something very complex, and a lot of times can be misconstrued, to just simplify it into one statement. And that's why I love this Notes to Inspire email that I get daily from him. Is that so a culture is strong when people work with each other for each other, and it's weak when we work against each other for themselves. And so I that encompasses a lot, but I really like the way that's phrased. So that's where I was going with that. So in regards to HR, what do you think of when you think about culture?
Yeah, I think that there's I think there's a lot of different things to go into it. I think it's driven a lot by leadership, because I think if it doesn't come from the top or even any kind of management, it's that drives the positivity or the negativity of a culture, I think, in a company. So I think which can be a challenge in some companies, because if you don't have the culture or the positive culture from the top coming down, it's tough to to make an impact or to try to influence that culture in the right direction. So I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about. I also thought about the environments that I've been in. I mean, I've been in a lot of very positive culture, and they all have kind of the same themes. And I've also been in a couple negative, very toxic environments also. So, and just to compare and contrast and things like that is, we can get into that, but there's a lot of similarities in the good environments that I've been in, at least, and what I've seen out there. So, and I think it's a big topic right now, especially with, I think, the way work is changing, where how people view culture in a remote or a hybrid workforce too is a big deal. So that's a big talking point right now, is these companies feel like they're losing their culture that in the office culture, kind of where, there still is culture. You can get, sure, you might not have the water cooler chats that you used to have, but there's different ways that people are connecting, online or whatnot. So, I think that
Sure.
that's going to open up a whole lot of additional stuff on culture as we move forward in the workplace. So,
As we evolve, right? I mean,
yeah,
I like what you're saying, because that's the real situation where this is kind of the culture of a work environment, right? A video conference or a podcast, or not necessarily a podcast, but for work. But more importantly, it's evolving. And so how do we maintain? How do you maintain as a leader positive culture within a community when you have less face-to-face interactions? And I think that's what we're definitely running into at my workplace. But what's interesting about when you talked about leadership being an integral part of determining what the company's culture is, I couldn't agree with that anymore. I really think that's a big piece of it, right? When you see toxic companies or companies that aren't doing well, you know, look at the leadership, and it doesn't take too long, whether it's the top level or whether it's just a level below, somewhere along there's dysfunction, right? There's somebody looking out for
yeah,
themselves rather than looking out for the individual that are working for them. But what's also interesting is, in researching this and kind of looking at this topic, I also have seen it as an example where sometimes the culture is actually very cohesive and good from the floor level, but the leadership was still toxic. And the example that comes to mind, I have a personal example, but the example that comes to mind is the story about Herb Brooks and that the Miracle on Ice team. I thought that was a perfect example of almost kind of old, and this is maybe a little old school thinking, so I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but that was a culture that essentially was established by her being the constant villain. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, if you watch the movie, of course, it's a huge Disney film, and my kids love it. And I'm sure you're a huge fan, coming from the great northwest of our northeast, Eveleth, town of Eveleth. But that
yeah,
whole concept of the cohesiveness and the culture actually worked together as a team because they had a common enemy, and it was Herb Brooks always pushing them to do the sprints after a loss or after a game, or just kind of taking it to that nth level, pushing them to actually become stronger as a culture, as a team, because they had that constant, fear or maybe hatred towards Herb Brooks that made them stronger as a unit. And
yeah,
and
for sure.
and I would say in the movie you can see that he kind of is the puppet master that put that all together. So that's an example of a culture that actually flourishes, even though there's maybe poor leadership. But I
Yeah,
guess you could make the case that maybe Herb Brooks was actually a great leader because he knew exactly what he was doing.
yeah, for sure. I think, and I wonder how, if that would fly in today's world, right? Or today's, at least in the workplace. Maybe in sports, it's a little different where you can play that role. But and it's the other thing was his players knew that he loved them. It was just that was his style, right? I think that was the big thing, is like, they hated him but they loved him, kind of deal. So
Well, and I couldn't agree more with that. And so there was established trust there, at least with Herb Brooks, right? And so
yeah,
maybe their common thing was still that they came together, but there was already established trust and a love for Herb Brooks. One of the things that I think that, once again, I'm going back to Simon Sinek because he does such a good job of talking about CEOs and talking about the why message and the golden circle. But he always talks about, if you're a manager or a first level manager and you have somebody that you have to put on a PIP, performance plan or anything like that, he said our natural instinct is to, oh, yep, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, and and you have to take care of all these things, or else we'll have to go a different direction. You'll have to be fired from the company.
yeah,
What Simon says, he said, I flipped that on its head. What if our leadership sat somebody down and said, hey, how are you doing? And I know this sounds soft and it's a little different than the way we grew up, but it's like, what's going on? I know that I know you're not performing at your highest level. I know you're not seeing the results you want to see. How can I help? What's going on?
yeah. I
Stop.
agree. I think that I think that's a better approach, versus pips are definitely, people have most people don't care for the pip. Basically, it's just your ticket that you're going to be out of here in 90 days, essentially.
Right.
And
It's a
it's,
process that started in
it,
place, right?
exactly, and it eliminates any trust or any, idea that you have faith in somebody. So flipping that on its head, it makes sense where, we care about you. We want you to succeed. How can we get there? Versus
Yeah.
like,
Or what's
here's
going
the
on in your
requirements
life,
you have to meet. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, I think toxic, environments don't look at it from that perspective. So yeah, I don't know. I think a big thing that I also think of is, and also I think related to the performance plan is like psychological safety. It's a big, it's been around forever, but it's a big buzzword right now in like corporate America, like feeling like you're unsupportive, or especially in remote, right? You don't know the vibe of things, so you don't you have fear of like speaking up. You don't feel like you can make recommendations, things like that. You fear, maybe in fear for your job, but if a company can really provide psychological safety, knowing that you can, bring ideas to the table, embrace your mistakes, you know, uh, those kind of things, that you can take those chances and not have to worry about your job or your reputation at work. I think companies that can foster that, that do foster that, see a lot of success, because it's a big thing, right? I've worked at jobs where every move you make, you feel like, am I going to get fired for doing this, or am I going to get reprimanded for taking this chance, or that whole,
yeah.
ask for forgiveness versus ask for what
Permission.
is it? Permission?
Permission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which
Well,
which I think is a good thing. I've worked with several bosses where they kind of embrace that, right? They
well,
trust you enough that you're not going to do something, you know, stupid.
and
And yeah,
yeah, and I think that word trust is such an important piece of this when we talk about culture, right? The fact that if I do fail, gosh, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not going to lose my livelihood, my insurance, all the stuff that we have invested in our careers, going at that. So I think the verbiage is very important, and it's interesting you say that because as you know, I know you're very savvy when it comes to IT and technology. I am not. However, I have kind of started to play with AI and this whole chat GPT, or is it called GPT?
yeah,
Okay.
GPT, yeah,
All right. Thanks. So I used it and I actually put culture in there. Like, what does a high performing culture look like? And I just want you, if you could just listen, because I think that the verbiage is very important when you talk about, trust being such a big part of it. I put that in, and my chat GPT said, culture is important as it shapes our identity, beliefs, values, and behaviors. It provides a sense of belonging and helps foster social cohesion. Culture also influences our worldview, our communication patterns, and problem solving approaches. It preserves knowledge, traditions, and heritage, promoting diversity and enriching society. Like, you know what I mean? So I talk about, somebody listening to this could right now say, yeah, these are all the, warm fuzzies of it. Like, like show
yeah,
up, it's work, it's your job. I just think that high performing cultures, that high performing organizations that have a positive culture, people want to work for them. They're usually highly, there's usually highly paid because there's a lot of benefits, because essentially you're performing at a higher level. So there's better success. And so
yep,
the difference is just it's so easy to see. And I mean, because we've all worked for toxic companies, right? I don't know if you have
yep,
a story you'd like to share, or if there's anything that but I mean, I definitely have one that I could share. I just We know when it's good and you know what's bad, but it comes down
yep,
to some of that verbiage we talk about helps foster social cohesion. We've all worked for that boss that does just the opposite of that, right? They
yep,
like put you in a corner and you're on that pip, and all of a sudden now it's working your way out of the company, rather than, hey, you're on a performance plan, meaning I want to help you perform better. Let's fulfill that plan and get you to where you need to get to, which is back being a high performer with our company. Instead, it's
yeah,
just the opposite. And
yeah. You're
that sucks.
unsupported. Yeah, when your manager
Yeah.
doesn't support you or a leader doesn't support you, for sure. That's a big one. So yeah, no, it's you mentioned you might have a story about that one, or do you want to expand on that, or I can go to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things I thought about in this was like, think of your favorite teacher, boss, coach, right? Like, what characteristics did they have, as far as, what made them that, what did they do that made the environment you worked in or played in or whatever positive? And so I kind of listed out a few, but like, I don't know, like like I had a boss at actually the company that ended up kind of being more toxic with the new leader come in, but she was very much like supportive. She kind of believed in us. You kind of got that feel like she would take one-on-one time to talk, to really run through this stuff and make sure that we understood that's how she feels. Like she's like, I want you to learn, I want you to grow through efforts, I want you to come to me when you have roadblocks. I want you to, take chances, do projects that might be out of your comfort zone, things like that. So, very much positive. And then when there were issues, she would come in and instead of like, you did this wrong, I'd be like, all right, here's what's happening. What's a solution we can come up with together, right? So she'd involve us in that process also. And then from the team perspective, I think empathy, and she was able to like take take everyone's different viewpoints and background and bring those together and really understand the differences in each of our experiences and our personalities and things like that, and be able to adapt them and bring us together as a team where we could thrive in that. So, and then a bunch of all my favorite bosses kind of were really good at, kind of the collective impact. Like, here's how our team is performed, let's celebrate our success as a team, but also everyone that did had a healthy contribution to it, or was contributed to it. So it was more we had obviously individual goals, but like the wins felt like team wins, right? And everyone,
Yeah.
and I've had a couple companies where I left, and when you leave, it's our teams would be like, this is one of the best teams I've ever worked for, right? And it's happened at a couple places, which means those are obviously very positive bosses and very positive leaders, but it was all very similar, inclusive, pushed you, challenged you, supported you, had your back when things came up also, right? So, things are going to come up when you work with other businesses or clients, and they're there to be a sounding board or to help step in certain situations. So I think all of those things really, were positives for me, and felt like I could grow and I could try new things and whatnot. So
Yeah, and I think one of the things I hear when I just listen back to what you just said is that mentors and people that had a profound impact on our lives positively were the people that had that kind of leadership, right? The empathy, the cohesiveness, and working together. Where I've seen it bad in my example was when somebody who was really a good salesperson gets promoted because they're on their trajectory heading upwards, right? Well, what made
yep,
them really good at an individual position in sales doesn't always translate to good leadership to on a team level. And
yep,
that's where I see it more and more each and every day, I guess, is that when people can't make that transition, when they still focus on themselves, like I said earlier, right? Rather than it's like, I'm a leadership position, I have this this number on my back, you guys better help me get that number. And you start
yeah,
doing well, why are we doing it? Are we doing it for the collective good, or are we doing it so your numbers look good for
right,
you and you
yep,
need us to perform? And so that's
yeah,
where when I've been in toxic situations, I've seen that where people really kind of, they remove the team idea and the team aspect and start thinking individually. Hey, I'm my neck's on the line for this number. Well, hang on. Aren't all our necks on the line for the
right,
number? But yet
yeah,
I hear that on conference calls. I see it at meetings all the time where somebody will start to articulate that way. And it's just like, wow, this guy just doesn't get it, or this gal doesn't get it. You know what I mean? Whatever it might be. So that's where I've seen some of that toxic. So to pivot a
yeah.
little bit, we talk about leadership, we talk about people setting that culture. How about you individually? How do you add to a company's culture, or how have you in the past?
Yeah, I think and I was a manager for a while, and felt like I had, essentially, I think I took from my past leaders, what I learned and what I could do. I mean, I'm always someone that's, out there wanting to help other people on my team, but also like, also understand, like, working with remote with people all across the country is so different than all my other jobs. Were Minnesotans working with Minnesotans, so I
Sure.
was very isolated. So it was definitely a, adjustment from personalities in different states on the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Midwest, right? So it was
Yep.
being able to understand different people's backgrounds and their perspectives, and they were different than what I was used to in certain situations, right? And so
Right.
you which I embrace that, because like, wow, you're learning from these people with completely different backgrounds. So I think that was one of the things I'm always open. I'm always a guy to raise my hand to help somebody out if they need it, or jump on a call or meeting if someone needs help with something. So I think that's a big thing. As a leader, when I was a manager, I mean, I always tried to be transparent with things that were going on in the business.
Sure.
I think
Yep.
that's another big one, where if you're not hearing anything, or if it's whispers or whatever, past leaders that I look at that I've had too, where they're straightforward. They can only say as much as they can say, but at the same time, you don't feel like you're being clouded from information that's important within the business or what's happening, things like that. So I thought that's been I think that was important also.
Well, when we talk about, you know, diversity and, this AI machine, kicked out, and diversity and inclusion is a big topic right now, right? And just kind of society. But I think one of the things, because I was, to your point too, right out of college, the first career that I had was Minnesota Midwest people, working with Minnesota Midwest people. And then as soon as I got into the biotech industry, literally all of a sudden I had this diversification from not only from different states, from different ethnic backgrounds and diversity. And I felt like I got better as I started to learn and work. And to your point, open-minded about just like these other people that I just haven't dealt with, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a conference call and there's somebody from New York on the conference call and somebody from San Francisco, the different personalities, not always the same, not to
Yeah.
stereotype, but just the diversity of what that picture might look like is pretty interesting. And I guess that's open mindset, that growth mindset, that opportunity to say, wow, how can I learn from these different unique individuals? When you said when you were a leader, I guess when I think about like, how can I add to the culture of a team that I'm on, right? Whether that was a sports team or the team that I'm on currently. So I might not be the leader. I've always wanted to kind of get up and kind of go that direction, but I wasn't willing to move away from the Midwest. And so one of the things I've always said is, what would I do what would I be looking for in somebody that works for me if I was in that leadership position? So if I got that district manager position or that HD director position level, what would I be looking from my team members? And so what I always do is this is something I talk every time I have my interaction with my lead manager. I say, what can I do for you? At the end of our calls, I just said, what can I do to help you in your life? Because think about it. They come to you, you're like, hey, we need to do this. We need to get this. We have to hit this number. So I always try to follow up with saying, what can I do to help you out? What
Yep.
can I take off your plate today? And it's amazing because I think that's a way that I can have an impact, even though I'm a small contract, business account manager in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I can have a positive impact on that culture by trying to be a solution-minded person, to try to look for the opportunity out there rather than the negativity or the things that are going wrong there. I think that's the
Yep.
opportunity for us to add to the culture and look
No,
to
that's great.
look to be curious and look to help. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's great. It's almost, I always think that from a growth perspective, what can you do to help your boss be better is, and like you said, you're just going to ask them, what can I help you with? Right. I mean, that's an easy way to, I think one, take something off their plate, maybe that they're struggling with that they know you can do, or just because they're not going to, they might not be the type of person that's going to ask you to, can you take this on for me or whatever. So I think opening yourself up and knowing that you kind of have that, that growth mindset that you want to help them and help them succeed also. So I know,
Yeah,
and it kind of reminded me on the flip side, because my last manager would ask me at every end of our one-on-ones, like, what can I help you with right now? Like, so it goes both ways. And I think on the
totally.
manager side, that drives also the transparency and also the culture too, right? So
Right.
and he wouldn't like take any, nothing for an answer, right? He's like, no, there's gotta be, what can I help you with? What can I do for you right now? So
Right.
it's a little gesture, right? It's nothing, it's not huge, but it's like, it's
Right.
just like that they cared enough to ask.
It
Right?
could set a tone for sure. It could set
Yeah.
a tone to a culture. So I totally agree with that. So I think we're on the same page there. What's interesting about this, and this just happened to me recently, because as much as I think I'm an optimist and I do a lot of these things for the greater good, I also get in my own way. And the example I have is that, we talk about how can we, even at our level or my level right now, is how could I hurt the company culture? And I just had a situation happen this last couple of weeks where I don't know if I hurt the culture, but there was an opportunity for me to not add to the culture. I think it would link directly back to one word, and the word is ego. When my ego got in the way, I put myself in front of the team. And here's an example. The example is pretty raw a little bit, but it's somebody. So we have a group of people we call in our local geography that all work together simultaneously to try to increase sales and try to promote and educate people on this particular drug. One person's not necessarily holding their weight very well. He's got a number of different things going on in the world, and it's just difficult. So because they're not collaborating with us, what I decided to do is I'm like, all right, take the bull by the horns. Let's get involved. So I put out an email saying essentially how just a suggestion on how we can get past this, the sales number that we're all going after by being strategic, and kind of not threw him under the bus, but just took over his role rather than, looking to help and looking to be empathetic, looking to be more trustworthy. And so by not getting out of my own way, saying that my ego is more important to make sure that the greater team looks good, rather than going and trying to help and doing a little bit more difficult of an interaction. I don't know. Hopefully this isn't too vague. But what I'm getting at is my decision-making wasn't sound because I wasn't truly looking out for the greater good of the team. Even though I might not have been me that was holding us back, there's an opportunity for me to be part of that culture, to be part of that trust and that team, to look out for my fellow teammate and that person next to me and say, hey, I noticed something's going on. How can I help you? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, and your intent was positive, right? Like it's
right. No, and
which
I'm yeah, and I'm not throwing myself totally under the bus. I did come with good intent, but what I'm saying
exactly.
is I he called me on it, and he's absolutely right. There was an opportunity for me to reach out to him personally and say, how can I help you so we can help the greater good, rather than just saying, all right, so since you don't want to play in the sandbox, we're going to go play in the sandbox, and this is how we're going to do it. Sure. So I took the team mindset out of the decision making, and I thought more about myself, because if we don't move forward, I don't look good. And that was driven by ego. Yeah. And it was great because I caught it was an opportunity for me to catch myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And, learn something probably also about, next time you encounter something like that, obviously. So, no, and honestly, the culture to have the culture where someone would actually come back to you and talk to you about that is positive. Some cultures would, go a different direction, or some people would handle that differently, but to come back to you and actually maybe address it as a positive too. But,
no, great point. It's, I guess what I'm getting at is a lot of times I feel like, we always talk about a certain topic on this podcast, and I love the ideas that we generate and kind of the thought process, because it helps me. It does. It helps me think of how can I show up differently? How can I show up just even 1% better tomorrow than I did today? And this example, but I also want to be real, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I want to be authentic, and I want to say that I make mistakes every day. And this was one that I was kind of blindsided by, but I'm pretty aware of now, which is great. Yeah. So now I can learn from that and move forward, right? And so when I see that opportunity come up again, instead of reacting with ego, I can react with trust and empathy and some of the other things like the AI machine told me to act like.
Right. Gotcha.
And I know that we've been talking corporate the whole time here. I think this culture, you could really kind of cut and paste it in any scenario, right? Whether that's a athletic team that you're working with, whether that's your home life, the people around you. If we show up more caring about the other person with empathy and trust, I think ultimately we can show up better for ourselves. Like, as an example, I think about one of my favorite jobs I've ever had in my whole career, and I'm not quite 50, but I'm getting closer. Was my job in college, the La Playa bar. We had some of the most fun, laughing. I've never laughed so hard when I've actually was making money and getting paid to do work. I got paid the least. it was probably the dirtiest situation. I mean, not dirty, but I worked in a kitchen, I worked
Yeah.
behind a bar, that type of thing. But yet the culture was out of this world, man. We had fun when we were back in the kitchen. We were telling jokes and laughing. Behind the bar, we were high fiving each other and helping each other out. I mean,
Yep.
the culture was electric, and it was still
Yeah.
one of my favorite jobs. And once again, that was only bartending and cooking, in this kitchen through high school and college. So
Yeah.
I
Yep.
it can happen anywhere. It's what you
Oh
bring
yeah.
to the table to add to it. I don't know your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think anyone that's worked in the service industry, I think a lot of this stuff is transferable to corporate world, right? Like I think I was a bartender, well, with you there. So
Yeah,
and it was we had fun. You forget you're working, right? You're just
right.
having fun. You forget you're getting paid to do that. So
What
that's always a good thing when you're doing something you love and getting paid for it.
what a novel concept to the point where all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm already done working. That whole
Yeah.
idea of enjoying and being passionate about what you do. It's one of the reasons why I love doing some of this, the coaching that I'm doing. Hopefully getting into speaking down the road. It's just, I get to the point where all of a sudden I get so engulfed in it that I just, it goes by, time
Yeah.
goes by way too fast.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
So
Yeah.
I was just I literally, I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but I was just, I have this one last quote that I threw out. I don't know. I think it applies here. I really do. And I just saw it this morning, so it's top of mind. But it says a great way to understand yourself. So are we adding to a culture or are we taking away from a culture, right? So a question, this is kind of a statement you can ask yourself. A great way to understand yourself is to seriously reflect on everything you find irritating in others.
Hmm.
So a lot of times when we say, God, this person does this person does that, ooh, if you pause and
Maybe
take a little reflection of yourself, maybe you're the one adding
you're the
that
one.
toxic culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So
That
a great
that
way
makes
to
sense.
understand yourself is to seriously reflect on everything you find irritating in others.
That'd be some self-awareness right there. Yeah.
Right. Give
Yeah.
that'll
Oh,
give you some data to decide if you're
that'd
adding
give you
or
something to
subtracting.
dissolve. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's good though. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Very cool.
anyway, I thought that resonated. Any final comments?
No, I think this is a great topic. I mean, we probably even talk more about it. I mean, it affects I know, like you said, we talked about work, but it applies, everywhere. You think of your coaches and your teachers and the rituals they had, and the things that they maybe did that just every year they just did it. This is why we do it, and we do it this way, and not open to change and things like that. So,
Do you have a specific example of like maybe a coach or something that applied something that kind of was a general rule that set the tone for a culture or
yeah. Well, my first job out of college, I loved the company, honestly. The culture was interesting. So it was we were all right out of college. So we were all like in our early 20s, and
sure.
majority of us were guys, but that's besides the point. But the culture was, we were a staffing company and in kind of like warehouse workers and things like that. And if we had a job that we could fill that would start the next day, we wouldn't leave the office until it was filled. And that was the culture. So we'd be there till on the phone till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, sometimes calling old, candidates and people that could start the next morning. And then if they didn't do it, if we'd show up the next morning with that person, and if they didn't show up, we'd volunteer to do the job ourselves for the day. So it was
No way.
and it was a client satisfaction. That was, we promised the client, like, we will have someone there for you tomorrow. And so we worked until we got that person. And if we didn't, then we mostly down there. They never took us up on the offer usually to do it ourselves, but it
Sure.
shows the commitment we had to providing good service. But
So
you
tell
think
me
that
more.
would
What set the culture to get you to want to do that?
I using your bartender analogy, we had a lot of fun in the office. We made it fun. So we would have contests, we would, you know, joke around, we'd, try different things and challenge each other. But if we got the hire, we had a gong that we'd that we'd hit every time that we hired somebody. So we made it was a very much like work hard, play hard type of atmosphere. Like
Sure.
the office grew from like 7 people to 30 people by the time I left in 2 years,
Wow.
so just tremendous growth. And it was due to, that hard work culture, but we also all just love being together, And so
Sounds like it.
if you're with people that you want to hang out with and work with, then it made it a lot easier to stay late. We also didn't have families back then. We were all 22, 23. So
Sure.
that wouldn't work out right now for me so well, or for a lot of people
No.
probably. But
Yeah.
and that's one where you could think it'd be a negative culture, but it led to more team bonding and things like that too. So, but
Well,
yeah,
and
that's one.
well, it's funny because as soon as you started telling the story, I mean, for the people that are listening to the podcast, you're not going to see this, but if you watch the video, you lit up like a Christmas tree as you're telling the stories, remembering those days of doing that, where you feel like that. And what's interesting is like corporate America, they love to say, they'll do a presentation. We care about our people, we care about our sales, we care about our customers, and at the end, we just want to make sure everybody's having fun. And you're like, there's nothing fun about any of this. The fact that
Right.
you said that we have to have fun feels like it's an
Kind of
obligation, not a natural culture, right?
manufacturing fun. Yeah.
We are going to manufacture. We are going to have fun today.
Fun.
Here's our fun flag, and we're going to post that flag, right? So,
Well, it's funny. One more thing on that. So that company I worked for, there's thousands and thousands of people that have worked there, and every time like my last job, there was like 7 people across the country that I worked with that had that same exact job. And when we get together, it's like story time. Even though we worked at different offices, like everyone would share stories. You're bonded like just working at that company, so that's pretty special, I think.
oh, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And what's so funny about it is you had a big part of that too, right? You helped set the tone for that culture. And so I guess if there's a takeaway from all of this is that when culture is good, and when it's bad. So
Yeah.
how can you individually have a positive effect on a culture? So that's one of the asks that we ask, is that you remember when you start showing up to help each other out and help your teammate, you know, do that because you have more fun.
Yep.
The examples that we just shared, I think, are perfect examples of just it feels like not work anymore. And I think America, where we're at, and maybe it's the at home stuff and some of the things that have, come out of COVID, is that there's still opportunity to have an impact as an individual on the culture of an organization. I told you about when I screwed up and an opportunity for me to show up differently. Those are the things I'm going to be thinking about moving forward. And hopefully you as the listener are hearing some of the opportunities that you can have in your culture, whether that's your culture at work, culture on the team that you might be on, or just the culture of your relationship. I mean, we're heading into 4th of July weekend here, and
Yep.
let's see if you can bring that positive culture by helping somebody out that might be having a bad day or might be sitting off by themselves in a corner or something like that. How can you have a positive influence on their culture of that of that fireworks display, whatever it might be?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's great. I'd share a story about a challenger issue that I had, but I've never made a mistake. So,
Oh, that's so much easier. It's so much easier when you never
just,
fail, Jay, right?
I know, right? It's just,
You're like,
yeah,
I have nothing to learn from this because I never fail. You're
I've
like
never done anything
Fonzie.
wrong. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, hey man, this was great. I
All
appreciate
right.
it. And for all of you out there, I hope you have a great and safe and healthy 4th of July weekend. And yeah, take care and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.